Sound check 1. Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting of Governance Review Subcommittee to order. Please note that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings, and I'd like to note that quorum is present. In the room with me is Councillor Clark, Councillor Maureen Wilson, online is Councillor Danko and Councillor Crutch. And thank you to staff that are here for this long and arduous meeting. Thank you. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, there's one change to the agenda. We have one new notice of motion, item 12.1, review and evaluation of lobbyist registry bylaw.
Okay, thank you. So may I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended? Councillor Wilson, Councillor Crutch. Any discussion on this agenda? Long and arduous agenda, no, okay. Thank you. So please indicate your vote now.
Now the public knows our trick.
And that carries 5-0. Thank you. Moving on to declarations of interest. Members of committee, are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, moving on to the approval of minutes from the previous meeting. So from July the 5th, may I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of the July 5th meeting? Councillor Danko, Councillor Clark. Are there any discussions on the minutes? Seeing none, may I have your vote, please? And that carries 5-0. Thank you. Moving on to consent items. This is for item 9.1, Advisory Committee for Persons with Disability logo, CM 23029 citywide. May I have a mover and a seconder to put this item on the floor, please?
Receive.
Yes.
To receive? Oh, okay. To receive. Councillor Clark and Councillor Maureen Wilson, please. And is there any discussion on this item? Councillor Clark, please.
I just wanted to thank staff. They did exactly as we asked, and so we now have the information here, and everything should be fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Did I see you raise your hand, Councillor Crutch? Councillor Crutch, please.
Yes, thank you for this this explanation. The only thing I would say was that there's a bit of an error in the report, and that is centered around the idea that the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities is an advisory committee. It's a subcommittee, and so all the references in the report to being an advisory committee should be changed to being a subcommittee. I think we already all struggle with the cognitive notion around this idea. I believe that at some point in the future, Councillor Taddison and I are going to address that issue of the name of the committee because it is so confusing. I just wanted to add that. Also wanted to ask about the costs being borne to do so by the subcommittee itself, and whether or not it has the budget to do that. I'm curious.
Thank you, Councillor Crutch. Director Grant.
Through the chair to the councillor. First, we can absolutely make those changes, and my apologies for the lack of clarity. In terms of the subcommittee bearing the cost themselves, it would be consistent with the way that we deal with advisory committees. But what I'm hearing from the councillor is that we should revisit that because this is different than others. And so we're going to take that away and see if we need to make a change, and as this report makes its way through council, we'll have more information on that at a later date. And thank you for pointing that out, Councillor.
Thanks.
Councillor, any other questions then? No? Okay. Thank you. Any other questions on this particular item then? All right. Seeing none, may I have the vote, please? And that carries 5-0. Thank you. Moving on to item 10.1, the City of Hamilton's flag and sign policy, CM 23014. May I have a mover and a seconder to put this item on the floor, please? Councillor Clark, Councillor Crutch. And would committee like to see the present or have a conversation about it or any discussions on this? Councillor Clark, please.
So in reading the report, and I may have missed the nuances, does the city maintain the right to say no to applications to have a flag waved if the flag was inappropriate? For example, the Confederate flag. Would we be able to say, this is the policy and we're declining your request?
Director Grant? Or, oh, okay.
I'll ask Director Tirani to answer that question as the author of the report.
Please, thank you.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Clark. Yes, exactly. That's why we have crafted the revisions to give the city and staff direction on the rules of the road of what is acceptable and making sure it aligns to the policies and norms that this council and our community expects. We've tried to follow guidelines that have been established both at the provincial and federal level to help support the work that was done to further modify this policy. So your answer is yes.
Thank you for that supplemental. Are we comfortable that we have the legal grounds to decline flags that are for an organization that perhaps do not share the values of the city of Hamilton? We find ourselves in challenges from time to time with advertising when we decline, and I'm just trying to understand how strong the wording is to ensure that legally we don't have any issues coming down the road. Does my question make sense?
Yes, we've left the policy in such that we maintain the right to evaluate each of the submissions.
Yes.
And generally there's an internal process that if we need to seek legal or other consultation within the organization before making a decision, that process exists as part of the internal processes.
Thank you. And the last supplemental, more of a comment. We need to ensure that if we do receive these requests, we keep methodical records to shore us up if there's ever a legal challenge on anything. Just a comment. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, I'll comment on one thing that's not obvious in the report that I think is important. There's been a complete overhaul of the way the information is accessed for the public. So we've created an online form for the flag, for the sign. We've created a shared inbox. We've created a shared calendar. We're posting information so it's publicly transparent as to what events and flag and sign are being celebrated. So to your point, that's built into the existing process, and we tried to really make it transparent and open for the public to leverage these services that are offered by the city as well.
Thank you, Chair. I was very pleased when I read the document. I support it. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Councillor Crutch, please.
Thanks, Chair Huang. My comments are similar. I think this has been very helpful. There are a couple of notes here that I think are worth saying publicly. In the previous policy, which I objected to quite a bit, it seemed to be solely at the mayor's discretion as to how these things would happen, which seemed to create a distance between the corporation itself and the mayor. And it seems like these could be political decisions, not corporate decisions, is how I always read that. And so that's been taken away from this now, and it's been given to city staff to make decisions, which I think makes sense. But there's one piece that's a little bit confusing. It says city staff will receive these requests when they're made for the flag protocol, and that they'll approve it, but it doesn't necessarily say who will do the approving. It does say the communication staff own this document and own updating it and that kind of thing, but it just kind of says blanket, in a blanket way, city staff. So it's in the one paragraph. I know in another part of the document it mentions with a little more specificity. So I wonder if you could just be really clear about which part of the corporation makes this decision when it comes to a request.
Director Grant, please.
Through the chair to the councillor, this body of work rests with our internal communications team and the senior communications officer responsible for communications, who is responsible for making these decisions and being guided by the details of the policy.
Counselor?
Okay, thank you. So it's a communications decision. That's how a department will be deciding on these requests. Okay, thanks for that information. I appreciate it. I have no further questions.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other any other questions about this particular policy? Double checking. Seeing none, may I have the vote, please? And that carries 5-0. Thank you. Moving on, I know it's not on my roadmap, but we'll. No. So item 12 is notices of motion.
Councilor Wilson will just introduce it.
Okay, I'll just give it a second. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Councillor M. Wilson, please, for your notice of motion.
Thank you, Chair. Just conversing with a number of my colleagues, and there's an expressed interest to actually start this process sooner than later. So my apologies to clerks. I would like to seek permission of the committee to waive the rules.
Moved by Councillor Wilson and seconded by Councillor Clark. May I have the vote? May I have the vote to waive the rules, please?
Bear with me for 1 moment.
This was a surprise to the clerk.
Oh.
Yes. I apologize.
And that carries 5-0. Councillor Wilson, would you like to continue, please?
Thank you, Chair Wayne. It is moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Clark. Whereas the City of Hamilton introduced a lobbyist registry bylaw in 2015, whereas the public interest would be served in having an updated review and evaluation of the lobbyist registry bylaw, including its exemptions, therefore be it resolved that staff be requested to report back to Governance Review Subcommittee with a review and evaluation of the City of Hamilton's lobbyist registry bylaw, including a scan of best practices in other municipal jurisdictions. If I could just speak to it momentarily.
Please.
Or briefly. The motion does state that the bylaw was introduced in 2015. My understanding of the history of lobbyist registries in Ontario, at least, is that as a consequence of an inquest in the City of Toronto, it was mandated to introduce its lobbyist registry, followed by the City of Ottawa, and then the City of Hamilton. It is not a mandatory undertaking by municipalities in Ontario. I believe to date there's only 9 out of 444. But it's my opinion, it's a good practice. I think there may have been one report on the lobbyist registry since its inception. I do think it's time for this new council, particularly given its said priorities, that we have an overview of the bylaw, including a review of, well, all of its content, and then a discussion about perhaps there are other jurisdictions that have since exceeded the City of Hamilton, including in the United States, and a discussion on whether we're satisfied with the bylaw as it's presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I recognize Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank Councillor Maureen Wilson for bringing this motion before us. I have watched over the years how the registry has worked and has not worked. And there are so many loopholes or confusions in the document that I know of people who were lobbying but did not lobby or did not register. And I'm not even sure if there's a penalty if someone doesn't use the lobbyist registry. What do we do? So all of those things need to be looked at, and I understand that there are a few other jurisdictions that have a little slightly more comprehensive registry bylaw. So I think the scan of other municipalities is really going to help us. It needs to be strengthened. It needs to be reviewed. It needs to be a document that the public can put trust in, and at the moment, I don't think they put trust in the registry. We also need to be more transparent about the registry on a go-forward basis. So all those things I sincerely believe will come out in a review, and we will have, in the end, some suggestions in terms of how we strengthen that document. Thank you for the time, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I recognize Councillor Danko, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate this coming forward. It is definitely very timely and overdue. It's something I've been personally struggling with a number of times. I think the Greenbelt scandal really highlights the need for really specific rules around lobbying and who meets with who and how that's recorded. My question through you, Chair, to staff, just to make sure I understand the scope of the review. Traditionally, when we're talking about lobbying, we're talking about developers, development groups, business dealings. But I want to make sure that the review also includes advocacy organizations and individuals who are advocating for changes to city policy, which is essentially lobbying as well, although there may not be a financial component to it. So will that be part of the review as well as business dealings?
Thank you, Councillor Danko. City Manager Thorne, please.
Through the chair, Jason Thorne, acting city manager. Yes, so the definition of lobbyist is one of the provisions of the lobbyist registry, and so there are current definitions today in the bylaw that speak to businesses, developers, lobbyists, not-for-profits, what constitutes a lobbyist and what doesn't. So if we're being asked to review the bylaw, that would certainly be part of it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Danko. Councillor Crutch, please.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of things come to mind for me here, and I'm with Councillor Danko on this in terms of how we understand and what a lobbyist is. I've often come across situations being like, well, should this person be this person a lobbyist? I don't know. There's also a couple of accessibility issues with the lobbyist registry right now. It's written last name first, first name with no comma. Like if you look at it, some names are all in lowercase. Like it needs to just have a look at in general about how we present the information. And when I say that, there's two things that come to mind about how we present the information that concern me, one from a political perspective and one from just a nonsense perspective. Yes. So when we have someone who is saying that they're a lobbyist and they're going to lobby every councillor, but then don't do that, it actually makes it difficult to know what the actual thing they're doing is. If they're really only speaking to me and no one else, then they should say that. If they have no intentions of lobbying everyone, they're right now using a blanket of just putting every councillor down there and saying they're lobbying them all when they're not. I've seen many people say that they're lobbying me. I've never heard from them. So I think that's important to think through from the nonsense perspective. From the political perspective, I'm concerned about this notion of not lobbying senior staff. We always go out of our way to talk about the difference between the bureaucracy and the political function. And we have a lot of instances here where I see lobbyists are particularly lobbying city staff. Like, for what? Like, political lobbying of city staff in and of itself, something we just need to think about and reflect on differently. Is the word lobby the right word for that? I don't know. Maybe there needs to be a different way of indicating what the activity is. Because if that's what's going on here, I think that opens up a different kind of conversation. So I want us to be clear about what these things are, what it means to be doing that, and make people be more narrow in their scope when they're submitting these things. So I think as a review happens, it would be helpful to have those things considered as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crutch. Any other questions, comments on this particular item? Councillor Maureen Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair. So my apologies to my committee members in that I neglected to insert a date in the motion. So if I could have a brief conversation now with the clerk staff of what they deem to be reasonable to allow for a timely review, but thorough review. Would it be Q2 of 2024? Okay, Q2 of 2024, if I could just a slight amendment to affect that. Thank you.
Elsie Bates, have you been able to add that?
I will add that for the minutes.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Any other questions, comments? None. May I have the vote, please? Yes. That carries 5-0. Thank you. And looking forward to seeing what that results in. Moving on to general information or other business. So 13.1 is amendments to the outstanding businesses list. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the item on the floor, please? Councillor Clark, Councillor Wilson? No? Yes, Councillor Wilson. And discussions, Councillor Wilson, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to raise, Chair, for your attention that 13.1AA is deemed to be complete. And I know that a question was raised by my colleague, Councillor Kretsch, about reviewing the funding source of it. So I don't know how that may affect that on the where it is right now. Thank you.
Thank you. City Manager Thorne, please.
So through the chair, I took that as just a question to follow up with after the meeting and not a request for a full report back. So if it's that, then I think there's no problem with it coming off the OBL, and we will provide that information to committee members.
Councillor? Okay, thank you. Any other discussions on this particular item? Councillor Clark, please.
So the committee is required for municipalities under legislation. They are a subcommittee of council. I guess the question I would have is, would it not, based on that information, would it not be prudent for this committee simply to make the recommendation that the city pays for that logo? We're required to have this organization by law. It's a subcommittee, not an advisory committee. That makes a completely different process for that committee. Logically, for me, it just makes sense that we would pay for that logo, if we agree with the design of the logo, obviously.
So looking to either city manager or GM Zagarek? City manager?
Yes, and through the chair, I'll see if Mike can answer. I'm not, because I believe there is an approved budget to the committee, which does make it a little unique from, like, you know, the planning committee or the doesn't have a budget per se. So there is an allocated budget. So I don't know if Mike can speak to that.
Through the chair, Mike Zagarek, General Manager, Finance, Corporate Services. I apologize, I wasn't here for the conversation, but I'm getting a sense of the question. A option would be for committee to direct that the costs associated with the design of the logo be absorbed within the subcommittee's approved budget or be absorbed within the city's either 2023 year end, or if this carries over into 2024, that staff identify a funding source for 2024. So again, subject to the timing for the completion of this work, it could be either absorbed through the budget or absorbed through our 2023 year-end process, or that staff identify a funding source for 2024.
So can we leave that then with staff to look at those options and advise how we're proceeding at the appropriate time?
Through the chair, we can, and maybe we can work with clerks for the purpose of this report going before council, that we have that information when the minutes of this committee goes to council.
I sincerely would appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, GM Zagaric. Any other comments or questions on this particular item? Okay, seeing none, may I have the vote, please? And that carries 5-0. Thank you. I know we have all been waiting so patiently for item 15, which is adjournment. Whoa.
That's a start of four.
Counselor Clark, wow, okay, thank you. Counselor Clark and Counselor Maureen Wilson to second. Any discussion on this particular item? I can see Counselor Danko's really thinking about what he may want to say about this. But I don't see any other discussion, so may I have the vote, please?
Good job, Chair.
Okay. And that carries 4-1. Thank you. At the very minimum, we have now adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.